Hi everyone and welcome to this event. My name is Ruth Lindley and I work in the campaigns team at the RSPB. So we're really excited to be running this series of events as part of Great Big Green Week and have a fantastic group of speakers who will be hearing from this evening. So before I hand over to Veronica, who will be chairing our panel this evening, I just want to run through a quick bit of Zoom housekeeping. So you'll see that the chat function is available for this session. We will not be monitoring the chat box for questions as the panelist discussion will be led by the chair. But if you would like to comment on or agree with anything that our panelists say, you are welcome to post it in there. Your comments will be viewable by the other attendees of this event, but not in the recording. If you want to, feel free to introduce yourself to one another and say where you're dialing in from. When using the chat box, please be polite and respectful of one another and our panelists, as we will not tolerate any bullying or trolling. So this evening's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the RSPB's YouTube channel. Your camera and audio settings have been disabled, so you will not be in the recording. Once the event ends, a short survey of 4 questions will pop up in your browser. This is optional and your answers can be anonymized, but we'd really appreciate your feedback on this event. If you run into any technical problems this evening, please contact Zoom directly. So now moving on to what you're all here for, I'd like to introduce Veronica Pickering, who'll be chairing this evening's discussion. So for more than 25 years, Veronica has worked with children and families from multicultural communities as a social worker, a children's guardian, and as an international child protection consultant with the UN and other NGOs, working mostly in Africa. She now negotiates for the needs of diverse communities on behalf of multinational and global companies, advising them on corporate social responsibility programs, networking and community links, and diversity and integration. For the past 8 years, Veronica has worked as an executive coach and mentor with individuals, universities, and companies in the UK. She supports several Nottinghamshire charities and organisations and has for many years been a strong supporter of wildlife conservation and access to the arts. She was appointed as Deputy Lieutenant for Nottinghamshire in 2013 and as an Honorary Air Commodore for 504, which is the Nottingham Squadron, in 2018. So now I'll hand over to Veronica.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for that very generous and full description of some of my history. And it's very kind of you to introduce me. But also I just want to say a quick hello to all the attendees for this evening's event, which is very, very exciting and a unique event, I think, also for the RSPB, probably for a lot of other nature and conservation organisations too. I know that this evening is a unique event in lots of ways because the programme fits into a larger and wider event, which is part of the Big Green Week, which the RSPB is hosting. This is obviously because of the time that we live in and the events that we've lived through for the last 2 years nearly, mostly digital. For this event and for the next 45 minutes, we're going to be focusing on racial justice and the fight for nature, people and the planet. But I know that there are other events which you can also look in and sign up to, which I'm going to promote right here and now, which really are focusing on disability and also gender. So I'm hoping that you'll get an opportunity to look at those events too. For this evening, we have gathered and brought together some amazing women, and Ruth started to say something about them. I'd like to say just a little bit about them. There are 3 of them joining me this evening. And they are all unique in what they do. They're all experts in what they do. And they're going to be part of the panel this evening. And we're going to have a really great conversation, more in depth than I think that I've been able to take part in for the last probably 3 or 4 years that I've been involved and working much more closely with the RSPB. So I'm very excited that they've agreed to join us this evening. So I want to start by thanking them. And let me begin by saying a little bit about who they are, but then after that, I'm going to ask each of them to add to their own introduction, because I think they're going to be able to say a little bit more interesting things than I'm able to say, frankly. So let me go there. The first of our guests for the panel this evening is Helena Craig. And Helena Craig is a lawyer, a community activist and campaigner, and as set up with her daughter, and you'll know a little bit about Maya Craig Rose, and she and Helena both run Black to Nature, which is a fantastic youth and inner city program that they run to try and get young people out of the city, into nature, into the countryside. And I'm going to ask Helena to say something about herself in a moment, but I think she's amazing, and I'm going to be able to hear more from her, and you'll be able to hear some of her experiences and her own, I guess, challenges of being who she is, where she's from, and how she's brought her own identity into the work that she does. The other guest that we have this evening is Karen Larby, and Karen is also somebody that has spent most of her career campaigning for the rights and access of the rights of Black and minority ethnic groups, not just to nature, but also to well-being and mental health. And she takes her mental health program out into nature and works jointly with those two areas. And it's the first time that I've known somebody do this kind of work as distinctively as Karen does. She's also a member of the RSPB England Committee, where I also sit. So I know Karen's work through that committee as well. And I'm hoping Karen will say a little bit more about her work, which is really about Black women and healing in particular, which I know she's very passionate about. Our other guest this evening is Ghazala Kaursar. I'm hoping I've said that right. Ghazala is a practicing lawyer as well, and she's had a lot of experience working with lots of youth groups in inner cities, and I know it's in and around Oldham and Manchester areas as well, and across the UK with her work with Scouts and other uniformed youth groups. And I know through her work as well that she's been involved with the England Committee as well, and she's particularly interested in her own community and her own cultural groups, as well as the wider groups in the UK getting together and working better together. So I won't say too much more about these ladies, because I think they're going to be able to say a lot more about their own individual work and how their experiences are connecting with the subject areas that we're going to be talking about tonight. And on that note, the topics for this evening are going to be really focusing on the lack of diverse voices, not just voices, but actually faces in the fight for nature. So I think that's going to be a really interesting topic to look at in a little bit more depth and detail. The other is seeing yourself and others like you in nature, which you'll have heard me, those who know me, say a little bit more about this and how difficult this has been as a subject to discuss, and quite sensitive in some areas, but also really just how difficult it is to be that person that doesn't necessarily feel that they have access to nature because of the way you look, or maybe because of the way you don't quite fit into the wider picture or feel you don't. So there's going to be something interesting to say about that. Social barriers to accessing to nature and connecting with nature is another topic, and stories of connecting to nature despite those barriers. So there are 4 very distinct areas, but all interlinked. The one thing that I think that brings us all together is all of the group tonight, all the panel members, all agree on one thing, and that is that there's a lot more to do. There's a lot of challenges that we have not been able to overcome. And this is a great opportunity for us to be able to voice some of those challenges and also say a little bit more about how we want the world to look. So before I go into this a bit more, because I can feel myself sliding that way quite easily, I'd like to ask firstly Helena to say a little bit about herself in the next couple of minutes and to introduce herself. So if we can move over to Helen, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. You're on mute, Helena.
Hi, sorry, that was not a very good start. Thank you very much, Veronica, and thank you for having me on this panel. It's a really, really important topic, and it's great that the RSPB are going out to its membership to talk about something that maybe lots of people don't understand. So I am a retired solicitor, And what I found, really, the key thing that I found is that there's a very huge similarity between the thoughts and atmosphere within the legal system and within firms of solicitors and barristers and the environmental sector, you know, full of people who are dedicated to their jobs, and because of that reason feel that they're doing a really good job, and so diversity doesn't really come within it. And so in terms of Black to Nature, Maya Rose set it up back in 2015, my youngest daughter, who you might know as Bird Girl. But I think as an adult, it was like having a young person open your eyes to what is obviously there, something that you see every time you go out, but you sort of put it to one side, don't really think about it. So, you know, Black to Nature, as well as running camps, we have been running conferences as well, and really trying to get to the bottom of what the issue is. So I hope that we can, you know, go quite deeply into what the issues are in today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Thank you very much. I'd like to also ask Karen if she could also say a little bit about herself for our audience as well.
Great, thank you so much, Veronica. I'm really excited to be here and just really glad to be invited to this panel. My name is Karen. I am a trainer, I'm a facilitator in the social change world. I work at an organisation called Campaign Bootcamp, and we're really passionate about creating spaces where people can learn about how to campaign and do social change work, as especially people who are affected by the issues that they're campaigning on. So currently I'm running a 12-week program for environmental activists of colour, where people are coming together and learning how to campaign strategically and in an impactful way. I also call myself an accidental environmentalist. I borrowed that from Dr. Carolyn Finney, who wrote a book called Black Faces, White Spaces, and it's all about the African-American experience in the great outdoors. And she calls herself an accidental environmentalist, and so do I. I kind of landed in this sector a few years ago when I set up a group called POC in Nature, and it's really about getting and inspiring people of colour to have conversations about the healing power of nature and the healing power of nature and environmental justice, and also our ancestral traditions that honour the land and honour nature. And the reason I set that up is because I was having a bit of a large mental breakdown several years ago. I had experienced some sexual violence and a lot of trauma, and I was also dealing with a lot of burnout working in a mental health charity, and not really having an opportunity to talk about the disproportionate impact of the mental health system on Black people. And so I had what I now call a spiritual experience in Dartmoor, which is in Devon, where you're at, where you're visiting this week, Veronica, and realised that I wanted to share that experience with, or encourage other people of colour to have that experience as well. So that's a bit about me. I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's really lovely. And it's really nice to have this extra bit of detail from everyone. And I forgot to say at the beginning, actually, when I was talking a little bit about Helena, that she has a Bangladeshi heritage. And I wanted to ask you, Karen, if you could say something about where your family originate before I move on to Ghazala.
Yeah, that's a long answer. My family are from a country in West Africa, is now known as Ghana. It used to be called the Gold Coast during the colonial times. My family are Akan. We are a ethnic group called the Akan in Ghana, and also within that we're the Ashantis. So I see myself as an Ashanti. Yeah,
thank you very much. And I'm going to ask also, Gaz, if you could do the same and just say a little bit about your cultural heritage when you could also describe yourself. Thanks, Karen.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for such a lovely introduction, Veronica. My name's Ghazala, mainly if I'm in trouble, otherwise it's Gaz, and I prefer Gaz as my preferred name. But in terms of background and heritage, in terms of profession, I'm a lawyer by profession, and I specialise in commercial contracts and procurement. In terms of personal life, I'm a mum to 3 boys, 4 if you count my husband, depending on how he's feeling on the day in question. He usually robs himself in as one of the boys. Quite often to rein him back. But alhamdulillah, I'm very fortunate. In terms of background and cultural heritage, I am a Muslim, and my parents originate from Pakistan, the Kashmir region actually. We're about 4 hours away from the line of control with India, so whenever there's shelling we do hear it, we hear the rumbles, and we do see the refugees as they come off the mountain ranges, those that are still left up by the line of control alongside the Indian border. In terms of nature and what brings me to this panel today, well, I suppose my journey started off in scouting really. I wanted to do something that my boys could enjoy, go out and enjoy the outdoors, something that I was borderline deprived of growing up. I live in Oldham, and there's always a call in Oldham that you're only ever 10 minutes away from nature. Well, not if your family owns a business, because our business runs 7 days a week, so we very rarely, if ever, close Eid, and sometimes on Christmas Day. But as a family business, we all chipped in and we all contributed. So we didn't really get a chance to enjoy nature in the way that maybe most of my peer group did, or my white counterparts even, given its proximity in Oldham and the great parks that we have as well. So from that perspective, I started looking at activities for my kids, came across scouting, always thought it was a Christian activity, never really thought of it much more than that. I had friends who went to Girl Guides at the time, and they went to a church. I never asked, they never said, never knew it was something that was available to me. And I felt I missed out. So from that perspective, I sort of took it on as a bit of a mission in terms of making sure that there wasn't going to be another generation of young people who didn't know that this was an activity available to them, who weren't able to explore the outdoors and really enjoy being outdoors. And part of that is learning the skills of being outdoors. So learning to map read, which in and of itself could be a barrier to you wanting to go outdoors, and even exploring a bit further afield than the regular tracks and main routes available. So that's a bit about me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gaz. That's really lovely. Thank you so much. Right, I think what we're going to do now is really just get into this conversation, because there's quite a bit to cover, and I'm really excited and really keen to hear some of your views on some of the topics that I've kind of summarized at the beginning. And also I did want to just to add, because I think it's really important that we describe our cultural heritage. We're talking about our differences, but also our similarities. And one of the things that does happen quite a lot is people just make assumptions of where we're from and what we look like. And it's not just our face. We have a history and we have an identity that comes with that history. And my own is a Kenyan, born in Kenya, raised in the UK as a 6-7-year-old girl, has been interesting. And I really identify as African, I really identify as Kenyan, but I also have some Indian heritage from the Gujarat area of India. So, again, people wouldn't have known that and basically wouldn't know that at all, frankly, unless I'd said. But I think it's also interesting to add that to tonight's discussion about where we're from and our impact on society. Right, so I'm going to launch this right now by asking you as a group, as a panel member, as all of you, 3 of you, to have a look at this subject, which is really starting off by this one topic: lack of diverse voices, faces, and really, I guess, you and me and others like us in the fight for nature. What do you think is happening here on this particular area and this particular subject? What do you think is going on? Because there's definitely a lack of representation out there. I'm going to just throw that to everybody and see what happens.
Can I just come in there on
Yeah,
the lack of voices? I think quite often there are two types of barriers to participation. There are the barriers that we hold in our own hearts, and then there are the external barriers to participation in these types of discussions, and being out there, being out in nature, and being a voice for those around you, setting an example so that others feel comfortable stepping up. In terms of the barriers that are outside, that are external, they include things like, as I mentioned earlier, not being able to read a map, not having the skills. We're not really taught these skills at school, or in a wider environment, you know, a wider educational setting even. So quite often it's groups like Scouting that will teach young people these skills, and if you have the assumption that it's not for you for whatever reason, then you miss out. So I think there are the physical barriers in terms of lack of knowledge, and knowledge that isn't acquired through, you know, groups that are generally available to people of colour, or a perception that they're not available to people of colour. That there's also a sense of intimidation that you quite often feel when you're out and about. Some of that is internal in terms of, to give you an example, we had a scout, we'd taken our scout group out for a hike, and we started foraging for food, and we'd sort of come across some mushrooms and some blackberries, and we'd started picking them and eating them there and then. And a white couple came along. They didn't say anything to us, but instantly my reaction was, oh, kids, stop, they're going to think we're really crazy, weird. Why are you eating just standing on the side of a lane? So I got the kids to stop, come on, let's keep moving. And as we were moving off, they got a little carrier bag out, and they decided to, you know, pick them. And I just sort of thought, look at this. I'm telling the kids that they can't because I feel foolish, and that's my own personal barrier that I created.
So do you think that's because you felt in the way, or you just felt that, you know, you made an assumption? Because I'm wondering really what difference it makes. What difference do we make by not having a presence, not being a face in the space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think obviously if there are no guiding lights in that sort of sense, there are no pioneers, it's very hard to break through. And being one of the first sort of people within your community to be out there to sort of teach others the skills and give others the confidence is really hard in any field, not just being a person of colour out in nature. It's equally challenging in the legal field as a lawyer. I'm sure Helena has her own personal experiences. I have mine. It's equally challenging, but I think some of that is the barriers that we create for ourselves, because we're always told that's not right. Do you not have common sense? And you think, well, common sense in the Desi way is very different to common sense in an English setting. And in fact, the two never quite align. So your own kind of inhibition kicks in. And I find that quite often mine does kick in. And I have to sort of hold myself firm in terms of I've not done anything wrong. I'm allowed to be here and it's okay.
Let me just turn to the others, Karen and Helena.
Yeah, shall I really do believe that so much of the reticence to go out into the UK countryside is not coming from ourselves or our communities, but are coming from the people living there, or how we imagine the countryside is. And I don't think that we can blame ourselves for that. And when we're looking at the conservation movement or the environmental movement, then, you know, if you've never gone and accessed nature in any way, if you've never gone and connected and felt that emotional connection with a bird or the countryside or whatever it is, then how are you going to care about saving it? And so if we look at a lot of our communities and a lot of our elders who moved here in the 50s and 60s, and so many communities, talking to them, you'll find out that they grew up in rural places, and one of the things that Maya's done at some point was interview 4 elders for a radio program, and they were all in their 70s and 80s, and they were like, oh, what do you want to talk to me about? I've got nothing to say. And then talking to them about their childhoods, and all of them, some of them from the Caribbean or from Bangladesh or Pakistan, but all of them had experienced this amazing childhood where they would finish school at 2 o'clock, and then the rest of the time, as groups of children, older and younger, they would play, they would swim in the sea, they would get a boat out to coral reefs, so they would swim in rivers, or even like a Muslim woman who talked about how growing up she had to wear like a black full covering when she went out and cover her face and stuff, and 2 veils at night and 1 veil in the day. And she was talking about being a teenager and swimming in their big pond, and that they'd have to like swim till it was dark and then like grab their clothes and run inside so no one saw them. And people came, and then as first generation they were living in areas of deprivation. They had to work really hard, and so with children they didn't have the time to take us to the park and do that kind of stuff, because they were working in double jobs. My dad ran a restaurant, and we hardly saw him. And so I think that when you look at people living in other countries now, and the countries that we've come from, children are going outside, they're playing outside, but there's been a disconnect between countries of ethnicity, and then even within 2 or 3 generations, and particularly living in cities. So I really believe that this isn't a cultural thing. This isn't about us. It's about the circumstances that our children are being brought up in, and all the barriers that limit why you might not go out, which a lot of them are truisms, unfortunately, in terms of racism in the countryside.
Apologies there, I got muted. Helena, I just wanted you to say something more about what you meant by racism in the countryside. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So there's on the one side, there is a reticence for a lot of people from our communities fearing racism in the countryside, and fearing like hate crime, and what am I going to do if something happens and my phone's not working. So, but I live in the countryside, and there is a lot of racism in the countryside, and a lot of ignorance. And I think that where I live, it's within half an hour drive of Bristol, and lots of people work in the city. But every camp, we've probably had 25 camps for young people, and I would say that 90% of them, we experience some racism. The children experience racism, or we experience racism. For example, one of the camps we had recently, we had our volunteers were putting up tents, and we had 1 taxi load of girls arrive, and they were between 17 and 21, and the doors were meant to be unlocked. They hadn't unlocked them. The cleaner came out, and one of the girls asked if she could go to use the loo, and the woman let her in, waited for her to come out, and locked the toilet and locked the building again. And basically I had a phone call from the person that organises events, bookings, saying that they didn't let them in because they were unsupervised. And it's not because they were white unsupervised, it was because they were of colour, and there's this assumption that those children, those young people, not children, are going to be trouble, might vandalize something, might damage something. So we get all this things happening all the time.
Thanks, Helena. Karen, let me come over to you and ask you whether you could say something more about this particular area of diverse voices and faces in nature.
Yeah, thank you.
And the lack of it.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks everyone for sharing your perspectives. I agree so much with what has been said. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, so I work with a lot of activists and campaigners in the environmental movement, and a lot of the barriers that are faced, or a lot of the barriers or the reasons why there is a lack of diversity in the environmental movement is because the issues that the environmental movement tends to campaign on seems very far removed from the experiences of people of colour. And so the typical example is campaigning for polar bears because the ice caps in the Arctic are melting. And that's a very worthy cause, but it's very much disconnected from the lives of our family members back home who are experiencing the brunt of the climate crisis. And those issues are not necessarily addressed in a meaningful way in the environmental sector. So it really, not having that link between climate change and environmental racism or extractivism or colonialism, which is actually the root cause of the climate crisis, not having those issues addressed by the environmental movement can be very jarring and very exclusionary. So because there is a lack of attention being paid to the issues that people of colour actually are facing, then it can lead to the perception that this movement isn't really for us. And in terms of connecting to nature in particular, Gaz and Helena have mentioned really good points in terms of the racism experienced in the countryside. And I would like to offer an example of being on a retreat. I was on a Buddhist retreat last year, just before lockdown actually, and went out for a walk by myself, and there was a white woman walking her dogs, and her dogs were very angry and very aggressive and not very happy to see me there, and were barking, and I was terrified, and the woman wasn't really doing anything about it, and it was really scary. And I remember a few months ago actually listening to a podcast about dog psychology, and it was a podcast by a dog trainer who said that energy flows down the leash. So even if someone isn't exhibiting or showing overt racism or saying any overt racism, any kind of anger or antipathy or fear or distrust or disgust or hatred that they might be feeling towards a person of colour is probably going to be felt by the dog that they're walking, and then leading to that kind of encounter. That's something, I don't know if that is true, that energy flows down the leash, but it definitely makes a lot of sense as to why a lot of people of colour actually grow up with a fear of dogs. And when you grow up in, even in the inner city, and you go to the local park and you see a white person walking their dog, it's often a very scary experience. And then we grow up with that fear. And something I've been thinking a lot about, especially during lockdown, where public toilets have been closed and pubs have been closed, and so people haven't been able to access those amenities, is for my own personal experience, I have some health conditions that are disproportionately affecting Black women, and that means that it's very necessary for me to have those amenities and know where those amenities are going to be if I'm going to leave the house to access nature. And so it kind of shows like the intersectionality of being Black, woman, disabled, and needing those facilities, but them either not being there or very in disrepair or very dirty. And especially because of, well, I don't really know the reason, but especially in our culture, in a lot of Black culture, a lot of Black women in particularly have high standards of personal cleanliness. And there are many different reasons why that probably is. Maybe it's because of hundreds of years of us being called dirty savages and being seen as unclean, and it just means that there is a heightened expectation that we keep ourselves clean and hygienic. And so being in nature might it might be difficult for us to do that because of a lack of amenities. And then that links to, you know, if you are a woman who does have certain health conditions, and this also applies to people with disabilities and women in general, but it's disproportionately impacted, has a disproportionate impact on Black women with disabilities, having to leave the house and not knowing where those local amenities are and if they're going to be clean or hygienic or well maintained. That can be seen as a barrier for a lot of people, and prevent people from going into the countryside and going into nature.
Thank you, Karen. That's really quite powerful, actually. And the image of, I guess, you know, the dog owner and the energy that person may have, and the impact that dog may then actually acts out in a way through them, and impacts on you and your ability to walk out in nature. It's something that I also experienced, actually. I'll just say a little bit about that, because when I was very young, I had to walk this gauntlet that I thought was a serious gauntlet out of my house into the street, in a street in Nottinghamshire in the 70s, to go to school. And it was not an easy thing to do, because the street that I lived on had a particular family who were very, very racist, and had a dog. And every time we went out, they would let their dog off the lead. And on one occasion, that dog actually attacked my sister, and ended up that involved the police. So I've never forgotten it. Plus, it also reinforced my fear of dogs until one day something really amazing happened, and I was presented with a puppy. And that puppy became part of our family. And actually, I really liked that dog. And I, you know, it became part of the family. And it cured me, literally cured me of my fear of dogs. But it took another 25 years for that to happen. And it wasn't an easy step. And there are lots of cultural differences in the way that we behave with animals as well. And I think there's an assumption that we're going to love somebody else's dog because that dog is part of their family. Well, it's not the case. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time for us to understand this cultural difference, which is what it is. Because dogs are working animals, and I was brought up with them being outside and not in the house. So that's a long story. Look, I think this is really interesting, because I'm wondering, just to sort of close on this topic, what we need to do. What can we do? And if you could quickly just respond to this question, what can we do to make things better and different? Because I think we all also have a responsibility and a part to play in being able to say something about how we want the future to look in this respect as well. So yeah, can I just ask all of you quickly for one quick answer? What can we do to improve the situation, and who do we go to? Helena, I'll go to you first.
Yeah. I think that I'll just put in two things, but we need an environmental and conservation sector that is ethnically diverse. You know, it's like 0.6%. I think it's described as non-white. So it's the second worst sector in the UK. We need to be up there at 20% in terms of people of colour within the sector. And then secondly, we need organisations like Black Together, Black to Nature, and other organisations that are doing this amazing work as well, to be working with people from inner city, getting them connected, getting them making nature relevant to them. Because it's got to be something that is relevant to you, and not just like a sort of a UK British tradition.
So that's a message to the environment organisations, isn't it? That's
yes,
what you're
absolutely.
Saying. They need to do something here. Thank you for that. Gaz, I'm going to call you Gaz. What do you think?
No, I'm not in trouble. I think I just echo what Helena's saying in terms of reaching out to inner city schools and making sure that young people are aware that there are careers in nature, offering internships and these types of opportunities. I came from a family where you were either an accountant or a lawyer, and there wasn't much choice in between. So it was never really considered a career option in terms of being an environmentalist, working in the outdoors. And I wasn't really aware that these opportunities existed growing up, so that I could sell them to my parents even. So I think, rather than say, for example, a nature reserve or some kind of organization trying to focus in on their local secondary school or local college, recognizing that they're probably out in the countryside, and there isn't, in terms of a BAME population, that much in terms of the countryside, but recognizing that actually if they want to increase diversity, they need to increase the target audience, and if the target audience is always going to be a rural school that's predominantly white, then those are the people that you're going to recruit, and there's no two ways about it. So maybe they should look at increasing participation in that way, looking to sell these careers broader, and making internship opportunities so that people can see what these careers entail and how they can fit, and how their passion or their interest in nature or environmental action sits within that organization and how they operate.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good a really good guide actually to what can be done, and some of the work that still needs to be done. Karen, let me go over to Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very difficult to answer it in a quick way, as you asked, Veronica. But I'm really passionate about grasping things from the root, and Angela Y. Davis talks about what being radical, it means grasping things from the root. And something that has become really clear to me in my own personal journey is that in my community, in Black communities, we did have an ancestral connection to nature. We do have ancestral connection to nature, and a passion for nature. And I mentioned that I'm Ashanti earlier, and one of the principles and philosophies of the Ashanti people is Sankofa, which means go back and fetch it. And it's really important in our culture to go back to the wisdom of our ancestors for ideas and inspiration, so that we can birth and innovate new things in the present and in the future. And something that's been really clear to me is that our connection to nature was seen as savage, was seen as primitive, demonic, pagan, even though we had really sophisticated civilizations and empires and ecologies and cosmologies and medicine and healing pathways. And all of that was systematically destroyed during colonialism, and even continues today. And we're still experiencing that impact now. And so in terms of being having a solution to this issue, what I'm noticing a lot is people going back to the wisdom of African traditional religions and really finding from within them the ethical mandate that's needed to be passionate about protecting the earth and connecting with it. And I see a direct correlation between people being interested in African traditional religions and people being passionate about protecting and connecting with nature. And so one of the frameworks that I've been using is called Eco-Womanism. I see myself as an aspiring eco-womanist, and eco-womanism is really a perspective that is grounded, or a methodology that is grounded in the experience of Black women. It's an interdisciplinary perspective that really uplifts our voices and our experiences, and it's primarily about Black women and women of colour, but it really helps us undo the myth that Black women and Black people are not interested in nature, because it really helps us connect the race and class and gender justice to the climate movement. And I think really by weaving those stories and together of how we've historically and even now continue to be connecting with nature, as Helena has mentioned earlier, it really helps us understand that if we have that holistic relationship with nature, that spiritual relationship with nature, then we are actually nature saving herself, and we are part of nature. And so for me, the solution is, very obviously the top-down approach is very important for environmental organizations, but that bottom-up approach of creating that cultural mandate And it also reminds me of Wangari Maathai, who's I'm sure you know, Veronica,
I do.
From was an environmental activist from Kenya, the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And she writes about, she uses scripture from the Bible to inspire people to act for nature. And so as communities that are very faith-led and faith-driven, I really think it's really important to use scripture, use our faith, use our religious traditions to really create that ethical mandate and really inspire people to be advocates for nature. And that really helps parents to be advocates for nature for their own children going forward. So yeah, that's what I would say.
It's lovely. Thank you so much. I think it feels like we're actually dealing with quite a lot and very little time in which to do what we'd really like to do, which is to have probably a whole workshop on this for a few days, right? Having a 45-minute slot is great, but I'm going to say this so that everyone else can hear it, is that we need more time to have a proper in-depth chat about some of the things that are rising out of these discussions already. And I'm really excited that we're having this conversation at all, but also really excited that, we have got some solutions within us that actually we can then share with a lot of these agencies. So it's fantastic to hear all the contributions from all of you three. And some of that hopefully will be picked up by those who are listening. And of course, we're all learning, right? We're all learning and helping each other learn about all sorts of different things, which is why this time is so important. I am aware that we've got about, how much time have we got? 10 minutes. Is that right? I think so, yes. So we've got about 5 minutes because I need a few minutes to close. So we have covered in the discussion in general, seeing yourself and others like you in nature, because we've talked a little bit about that. And I'm just wondering whether the social barriers to accessing and connecting are something, I think this is perhaps something that we could say a little bit more about, because I'm looking for solutions, and I think all of us are looking for solutions, but we can't skim the history that's going on here, which is what I think you're all reminding all of us and me about this evening. There's a history, there's an impact of that history. So I'm just wondering if we could just have a little focus here on some of the social barriers and accessing nature by all of us as Black women, and how we might find a way through for some of these organizations. If we were to give advice to these organizations, what would we be saying to them? And one of the things I guess I'm thinking here is that I've had a lot of people say to me, well, those communities are hard to reach, which really irritates, I have to say, politely, it really irritates me, because we're not hard to reach, we're there. And I've always said that, we're just there. We're not difficult, we're not, you can't demonize us. I think this is the issue. If you want to connect with us, please connect with us. If you don't know how, then talk to us. We're easy to talk to. I mean, okay, we might be a little bit prickly sometimes, depending on our experiences. But honestly, we want to help because we want our lives to be better and our children's lives to be better and our friends' and families' lives to be better. And we want to enjoy nature like everybody else. So what would you say? What would you give in terms of advice to some of these organizations around accessing and connecting in a better way? That's what I'm going to say to all of you. But we have got limited time, so you've got a minute each, max, to answer that question. So yeah, I'm going to go back to you, Karen, very quickly, 1 minute.
Yeah, I would just say very quickly, read this book about Eco-Womanism.
Can you put that in the chat for everyone?
Yeah,
in fact, you've mentioned a few books. You've mentioned a few books, and I'm aware that you have.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to ask you to repeat them, but please put them in the chat when you at the end, so people can see it.
Yeah,
okay.
I will do, definitely. And this book is by Dr. Melanie L. Harris. And yeah, she really talks about the importance of using the stories from within Black women's and women of colour's lives and histories. She's talking specifically from an African-American standpoint, but it's easily extrapolated to Black women globally. And yeah, just really ensuring that we're having that race, gender, class analysis and ensuring that we also have that historical analysis and really caring about the issues that are impacting the lives of Black people, whether that's healthcare, education, criminal justice. It's all linked somehow to the climate crisis. So being cognizant of that and being willing to have those conversations, especially like we're having now, it's really important to have that collaborative and mutually beneficial conversation about accessing nature.
Thank you. Gaz, you've got less than a minute, I think. I'm catching the seconds right now, right?
Absolutely. I suppose the most important thing I can say is don't make assumptions. Don't assume because I'm wearing an Asian dress that I can't speak English. Don't assume that because I've got an abaya on, I'm oppressed. In fact, actually, some of the most interesting and quirky people I've met and fun people I've met actually wear an abaya and wear a full niqab that covers all their face, as we all do now with our face masks. But I think the biggest thing I see in terms of access to nature is transport as being one of the biggest issues from city centres. Now, that doesn't just affect people of colour, it affects anybody, you know, in an urban area. And increasing transport, whether that's, you know, once a month or once a quarter and there's a regular bus service or something like that, that could take you to a beauty spot. So if you want people to come and visit your place, your outdoor reserve, whatever it is you have, you need to think about how they're accessing it. Not everybody has access to a car. My parents, you know, were always working. They didn't have time to take us. And we were expected to chip in as well as kids growing up, you know, in terms of the family business. So it's recognizing that having time is a luxury and a privilege, even, you know, the privilege to volunteer because you've got a stable job and you've got a steady income and you can give your time to volunteer is a privilege, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who might not have a stable job or might not have an income doesn't want to volunteer. So don't make any assumptions, reach out, see how you can help somebody and enable them to give their time.
Thank you, Gaz. Helena, right, I'm going to close with you.
Yeah, so I've just got a couple of things to say. One, have a look at the Bird Girl website, because there's all our conference information there, that details about our camps, but you know, the conference information is really quite detailed about what barriers are and how to overcome them. And then also Maya Rose has written a book which I can show you there. It's called We Have a Dream, and you can get it from her website. And basically she has interviewed and written about 30 young environmentalists from around the world who are of colour, doing really, really amazing things. And so, you know, it's great. It's age 8 to adult, and for minority ethnic children, it's going to show them that, you know, there are other children who look like them doing amazing things, you know, because they're not in the media in the UK and Europe. And for children who are white British, hopefully they'll see that there are children of colour doing amazing things and they're not all white Europeans. So yeah, so I'll show you it again.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Helena. Could you put that information in the chat as well?
Yeah, I've just put it in there actually.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, that's fantastic. I want to thank all of you for taking the time and for giving out your expertise to all those who've been listening. I know you're amazing. Now everybody else knows you're amazing too. So thank you so much. And I think this is the start of a longer conversation and a longer in-depth, I guess, deeper dive into all these issues. And I'm really hoping that we can all get together and do that. It's been my privilege to be able to be the chair for this evening's event. And I know that I've learned something as well. So thinking more about, I guess, what we've come away with this evening, I'm really struck by not just the, I guess, reinforcement that there are other barriers, not just environmental, but also emotional barriers that we carry, but it is about the environmental organizations being able to stand up and do more and to reach out and reinforce and connect with all the communities that don't feel that they belong in nature. And that's come across really, really strongly this evening. And also there's an assumption that people will volunteer. Well, if you're not well resourced, you can't have the resources and the time to be able to volunteer, especially if you've got no transport as well. And I think that was a strong message that came across. The privileges that are there for some are not there for all. And we need to think about what those privileges are and how they prevent complete and total commitment and also access to what others take for granted. And I think also the thing that I'm really wanting to I guess, reinforce is that there is a history around why it is that the Black community and the Asian community and others don't feel that they can connect. And that history is also embedded within colonialism and the history of how Black people have been treated. And some of that has to be understood in order for, I guess, environmental organizations to be able to access us as a Black community and us as future employees, or us as future volunteers, and also us as future campaigners for nature and the planet. And I think that's something I think that perhaps hasn't been looked at in enough detail. In fact, I know it hasn't. And I really challenge the organizations that are involved to think harder and longer. So yeah, as I said, this is just a dip into this topic. And I think it would be really helpful if we could have a more in-depth opportunity to say more. I want to thank everybody for organizing this event this evening, and especially the RSPB for going here. And as I say, this is a unique event. So I'm hoping that it doesn't feel too unique and that we do more of it, that it becomes more normal, that we can have freer conversations. But I also want to thank Ruth, who's been my ally in prepping for this evening. And particularly, I want to thank Emma as well for signing this evening. Thank you, Emma, because you've been invaluable. Thank you for helping us communicate our thoughts as well. And yeah, back to the panel members, to Ruth for organizing, for Karen for being involved, for Gaz for her contributions, and for Helena as well. Thank you, all of you. And I look forward to the next event.